First, thank you so much for having me here, and thank you so much for coming to this. I know that many of you here in Los Angeles, I invited a lot of my friends who didn't know so much about Highlander, and so they had a really great time meeting the people who are Highlander, because it is people. Here I know that many of you, most of you, do a lot more for Highlander than come up and speak every once in a while. That you live it, you live the life, and you do the work. And I got to say, to be asked to speak here is a really big honor, and thank you for having me. I was lucky enough to become involved in Highlander before I could walk, through blood. Myles Horton was my father's mother's brother, so he was my great uncle, but we just called him Uncle Myles. And so before I really knew anything about, well, walking, for example, and talking and speaking English, but before I knew anything about Highlander, I just knew him as Uncle Myles, and we would go up and visit him once a month and make a big dinner there, and he would just talk and tell stories up on the top of the hill at Highlander. And if you haven't been to Highlander, it's the most beautiful view in the world. Like it's great because it's not all national park. It's like rolling farms and then the Smokies, and it's just beautiful. And so we would go up and spend the day with him cooking and listening to stories that ranged from, you know, embarrassing stories of me when I was a baby, to family stories, to stories of the time 3 guys tried to kill him for unionizing the factory. So as a kid, you just grow up listening to these very Paul Bunyan, you know, huge, giant stories that are, and he was the best storyteller in the world. And the adults would drink 2-buck chuck, and that's $2 wine, if you don't know. And I know for a fact that's some fuzzy math, because the cases of wine were $10, because I saw the price on the case. So they were not 2-buck chuck. He was selling it up when he said 2-buck chuck. It was not. And so we would sit and have these big dinners, and my responsibility was salad. That was my job, was to make salad. And so what that meant was I would go down to the side of his house, and he had this giant garden. It was huge. And pick stuff I thought was a lettuce and make it into a salad. And his garden was incredible. It was like incredibly weird gourds, all different kinds of lettuce, peppers that I could never eat, and he would just eat them. He would just eat them raw. And what he would do for his salad was, when he was traveling, when he was traveling to like Central America, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and everywhere he would go, he would be in a place where they very specifically do not allow you to take produce back from. And so what he would do is he would buy a maraca, and he would make a little hole in it, and he would empty it out, and he would fill it with seeds that he wanted to take back with him to Tennessee. And so his garden was full of that. His garden was full of just like purple peppers and like Scotch bonnet stuff, and like all of it totally illegal. And it was just great. And so I got to make the salad, and he would always make you eat a pepper that just, you couldn't taste anything for the rest of the meal because the pepper was so hot. And then he would tell stories about Highlander. Now I know there's some people here who don't know much about Highlander, and thank you for coming, because that's what Highlander's about. It's about new people and new people kind of spreading the word of it. Highlander started in the 30s with coal miners, and Myles always said he grew up in the mountains, and he said he never felt poor. They just didn't have nothing. But he felt like he could see people struggling, and he could see communities that were hurting, and they didn't know what to do. And he could see when people would come in from outside communities and try to teach these people how to help themselves. And he said you could just see in the people's faces that the people coming in from other communities to help had no idea what their life was really like, and would be gone before this problem was solved. And so he didn't come up with the idea. He got the idea from various places that if the people taught each other, then they could solve their problem. So Highlander is an organization that gets people together that have maybe the same problem or maybe a similar problem. And I think he thinks it does two things, is that it makes you realize you're not the only one with that problem. And I think he thought that gave you strength when you know you weren't alone in your struggle. And the other thing he did was he would get people together from different communities with a similar problem so they could learn from each other. So it wasn't a teacher there teaching you, but if this certain kind of boycott worked in West Virginia, they hadn't tried it out in Alabama, maybe they should try it in Alabama. And if this kind of strike worked over here, maybe they should try it in Memphis. And it was the idea of getting people together and sitting in a circle in rocking chairs and really talking to each other. And that's what Highlander is. It's a think tank. I remember as a kid, he would always have to go down when I would spend the summers there, and he would go down to take part in a workshop. And by that point in my life, I knew, oh, he's Myles Horton, he's big medicine. And I thought he would go down there and like stand at a pulpit and like tell people stuff. And so what he would do is he would go and he would sit in a circle and he would sing with them, and maybe he would ask a couple of questions. But he never talked. He never got on a soapbox and talked. And it was an incredible thing to watch. And it must have worked, because the KKK burned him down a couple of times. So they must have been onto something. And when the sheriff's department seized Highlander's property and buildings and everything, Highlander said an incredible thing. He said, when they put the padlocks on the building, that you could padlock a building, but you can't padlock an idea. And when I look around, they haven't padlocked the idea. Also, in the new Batman movie that made over $600 million, Batman said the same thing. You have to become an idea. So not only did he influence people all over the South, he influenced Bruce Wayne, and that's pretty big. But that's what he was about. He would often say that you never learn anything by talking. He said, I'd never learned anything by talking, that you learn by listening. And he'd say that when you walk away from a room as a teacher, it doesn't matter what your experience of it was. Like what you hope is that the ball gets taken away from you. And I think that's a very inspirational thing. And when I look around at the people here, if I would say, obviously this idea has spread. Obviously this Highlander thing, it's gone not only all over the South, but all over the world. And it's gone to places where very specifically they did not want this idea, where they really didn't want people standing up for themselves and learning from each other and learning that they weren't alone. And so it's spreading seeds. His life was sneaking seeds into places where maybe they didn't want those seeds to go, and letting those seeds grow. And it's 80-something years later, and it's wonderful to know that the seed isn't a museum. It's still growing. And I think that now it's involved in things that in 1932 in Monteagle, Tennessee, they probably hadn't even heard of. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So if you're here, thank you for coming and thank you for having me. This is a fundraiser, so they can't do it for free. And the past 8 years administration hasn't been so generous with their funding of projects like this. But more than money, if you're new to Highlander, sign up for the newsletter, sign up for the website, and get updates from Highlander. It's not a timeshare. They're not going to bombard you every 2 minutes with something. But if you read the newsletter, you're going to read something that makes you very, very pissed off and that you can't believe is still happening in the year 2008. And it's going to make you want to be involved and want to help people help themselves out of whatever situation they're in. That's the way the seeds are spread. So even if you don't give anything tonight, and I think Tammy is going to be going around with a basket, and I think she's going to be taking up money, but if you don't give anything, sign up, because it's more than money, and it's about people, and it's about teaching each other and learning from each other. Thank you so much for having me, and I just got to say that I can feel Myles over my shoulder, and one of the great things about my Uncle Myles is he was the first person to give me praise when I did well as a kid, but also tell me that, boy, you're just totally wrong about that, kid. Yeah, I would try to contribute to conversations as a 10-year-old and say, you ever notice that people named Brad all kind of talk alike? It's 10-year-old stuff. And most adults would say, that's great, that's a really smart observation. And Myles would think about it and say, that's preposterous. So I can feel him over my shoulder, and thank you for letting me come and be part of this thing that he didn't start alone, but that hopefully we can keep going forever and ever. Thank you.